At my sister's wedding, my hand reached for the chair that bore my name, yet before I could settle into it, she abruptly pulled it away. My body collided with the glistening floor, right in front of 200 stunned guests. A collective gasp rippled through the room, quickly followed by a burst of laughter. Astrid, my own sister, then bent down, her voice deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. "The floor suits you better, sis!" I didn't scream, nor did I retaliate. Instead, I rose slowly, straightened my dress, and exited in silence. But inside, a fire raged within my chest. It wasn't merely the pain from the fall, but the accumulated sting of years spent as the sister no one stood up for, the one no one truly respected. What Astrid and my parents remained oblivious to was that I wasn't just another attendee at this wedding. I was the very foundation upon which her groom's entire empire stood. For it was only months prior that I had covertly rescued his company from impending ruin with a substantial $20 million investment. And when he recognized me amidst all those present, when the unvarnished truth obliterated the facade of lies my sister had carefully constructed, the entire wedding came to a halt. In the minutes that followed, you'll discover how a singular act of cruelty transformed a joyous celebration into a stark day of reckoning. You'll witness how the young woman they labelled as too cold, too driven, too unwelcome became the unforgettable name of that night. So, remain with me, because the instant the groom spoke, the atmosphere in that hall irrevocably shifted. My name is Calla Monroe. I am 38 years old, and I have dedicated the greater part of my life to cultivating a career that few, if any, in my family ever truly grasped. I ascended through the ranks to become the chief financial officer of a prominent investment firm. I endorsed contracts that boasted more zeros than my father had earned in his entire working life. I repurchased our family home when the bank was on the verge of foreclosure. I issued checks to cover tuition fees, medical expenses, and whenever life's demands grew overwhelming. And yet, when relatives inquired about me, my parents would simply sigh and state, "Calla is doing well, but she's still alone." That phrase was a constant refrain. My independence, in their eyes, was not a source of pride. It was a mark of failure. To them, a woman was only truly complete once she wore a wedding ring. My sister, Astrid, never contended with this particular issue. 10 years my junior, at 28, she grew up in a vastly different household than I did. By the time she reached her teenage years, my sacrifices had already smoothed her path. She never fretted over finances, never encountered a refusal when she desired something. She was intelligent, attractive, and charismatic, the type of girl who effortlessly charmed a room with a mere flutter of her eyelashes. While I meticulously managed ledgers and established financial security, Astrid was busy cultivating a significant online following. Thousands admired her filtered photographs and her carefully curated life. At family gatherings, our parents would beam with pride as Astrid recounted brand deals or proudly displayed gifts from boyfriends. They never intended to be unkind, but cruelty doesn't always manifest as a sharp, cutting remark. Sometimes, it sounds like excessive praise for one child and profound silence for another. I recall one Thanksgiving when I discreetly slid a check beneath my father's plate to settle his outstanding back taxes. My mother, observing this, quickly folded it and whispered, "Astrid is bringing her new boyfriend tonight. You'll adore him. He also works in finance." This was her method of redirecting the conversation, shifting the focus, ensuring that no one dwelled for too long on my contributions. Astrid arrived that evening, radiant, while I sat quietly in a corner, listening to our parents effusively praise her gown, her hairstyle, and her future prospects. My personal contribution simply evaporated like smoke. It wasn't merely favoritism, it was kindling for something far more insidious. Astrid never vocalized it, but I could clearly perceive it in her eyes. She resented being compared to me. Teachers often highlighted my aptitude for mathematics while Astrid struggled. Relatives would remark, "Kala is the responsible one, Astrid is the fun one." What they perceived as harmless banter cut into her like a sharp blade. Each instance my parents lamented my single status, Astrid's smile grew a little brighter, as though my independence served as undeniable proof of her own superiority. And as her wedding day drew nearer, I could sense a growing unease within her. "You'll attend, won't you?" she had casually said when the invitations were distributed. "But don't dress too corporately. This isn't one of your boardrooms. I wouldn't want you to intimidate the guests." It was uttered as a jest, accompanied by a smile. Yet, it was also a subtle warning. My presence, to her, was an unquantifiable threat. Then there was Cassian Dawn, the man she was preparing to marry. He was 32, a refined CEO who had built a technology company from scratch. However, what Astrid meticulously concealed from him, what she desperately wished no one would ever discover, was that Cassian's burgeoning empire had teetered on the brink of collapse. He had been mere weeks from declaring bankruptcy before a mysterious investor intervened with a crucial $20 million infusion. The sole name listed on the paperwork was C. Monroe Holdings. He never knew the true identity behind that name. He only understood that he owed them everything. And herein lay the profound irony. The woman he was marrying had a sister who bore the very name etched onto that contract. The sister everyone disregarded. The sister Astrid fervently wished to keep out of the limelight. My parents, predictably, adored Cassian. To them, he represented the pinnacle of achievement, handsome, successful, and our Astrid will never have to worry. My mother declared one evening, while I was discreetly covering yet another family expense. They viewed Cassian as irrefutable proof that Astrid had triumphed in life, while I remained a constant reminder of what they perceived as my incompleteness. What none of them realized was that Cassian and I were already bound by a connection far more robust than marriage, though he was still unaware. My investment had saved him, and one day, that fundamental truth would inevitably surface. For the present moment, however, the scales were tipped. Astrid occupied the central position, my parents doting over her, and I was relegated to the periphery. I had lived with this dynamic my entire life, but weddings possess a peculiar ability to force every buried truth into the open. Ancient rivalries refuse to remain hidden beneath sparkling chandeliers and pristine white linens. They resurface. They inflict pain. And when Astrid looked at me in the final days leading up to the ceremony, there was an unmistakable flicker in her eyes that communicated she wasn't merely preparing to celebrate, she was preparing to humiliate. I didn't yet know the full extent to which she was willing to go, but I could distinctly feel it. A storm was brewing, and when it finally erupted, it wouldn't just be about two sisters. It would be about truth, recognition, and a secret worth $20 million. The weeks preceding the wedding unveiled more than I had ever anticipated. While Astrid was treated like royalty, shuttled from one bridal appointment to the next, I remained largely overlooked, despite having quietly written a substantial check to cover the deposit for the very venue where she would be married. Every detail was meticulously lavished upon her. Flowers imported from Italy, gowns airlifted from Paris, and a guest list painstakingly curated to impress her online followers. It was as if my parents genuinely believed that this single day represented the absolute zenith of our family's legacy. They fussed over Astrid as if she were a queen, declaring each of her decisions monumental, as though the rest of us simply ceased to exist beyond her sphere. As for me, I was consistently asked to remain in the background, as if my sole purpose was to appear as a supporting character, careful not to disrupt their meticulously staged tableau of perfection. One afternoon, during a rare hour free from meetings, I stopped by the house, perhaps hoping to be of some use. I discovered my mother and Astrid leaning over a lengthy dining table covered with various fabric swatches and photographs. They didn't notice my presence at first. My mother's voice was warm, indulgent, overflowing with affection as she spoke of Astrid's choices. "This shade of ivory will make you glow, darling. Cassian will barely be able to breathe when he sees you walk down the aisle." It was the kind of heartfelt sweetness I had rarely heard directed toward me. When she finally turned, her expression visibly shifted. Soft pride was replaced by something considerably sharper. "Calla," she uttered, "don't you have work? You are always so busy." A moment of silence passed, followed by a faint sigh. "Sometimes I wish you weren't so cold, so practical. You never just let yourself be a woman." I had heard variations of this sentiment before, but each time it landed like a heavy stone in my chest. I offered a faint smile, unwilling to reveal the depth of the sting, and made my excuses, citing another appointment. Later, Astrid herself decided to unequivocally clarify her position. We were alone in her room while she tried on one of her numerous gowns. She turned toward me in the mirror, her lips curved just enough to suggest sweetness, yet edged with something much sharper. "You'll come, of course," she said, playfully fluffing her hair. "But just be there to show your face. Don't overdress. Don't arrive looking like you're presiding over one of your board meetings. No need to intimidate anyone." The words were coated in honey, but the underlying intention was unmistakable. She desired my invisibility, my ornamental presence at best, and my complete erasure at worst. I held her gaze for an extended moment, then simply nodded. Inside, my stomach churned, but I would not grant her the satisfaction of witnessing me flinch. The pattern persisted. Each time I volunteered assistance, I was subtly redirected, informed that the details were already handled, or that my input was superfluous. I discreetly paid for a portion of the catering without being asked, yet my contribution was never acknowledged. When the florist delivered an extravagant arrangement to my parents' home, my mother beamed as if Astrid herself had personally ordered it. I watched quietly as my financial resources were transformed into their perceived glory. It wasn't about the money. I possessed more than enough. It was about the truth being relentlessly rewritten to place Astrid at the epicenter and banish me to the periphery. Still, there were small fissures. I observed moments Astrid believed no one was watching. One evening, while I sat in the living room feigning to review paperwork, Astrid entered briskly, Cassian's phone clutched in her hand. She glanced around, failing to notice me concealed in the corner. The phone screen illuminated with an incoming call, and her face noticeably shifted, the practiced smile dissolving into an expression of profound unease. She quickly rejected the call, pressing her lips together, then subtly slipped the phone back into her pocket, as though she had never touched it. Her eyes darted toward the hallway where Cassian was engaged in conversation with my father, and then she forcibly reapplied her bright, cheerful demeanor before anyone else could perceive her momentary lapse. It was only a fleeting flicker, a moment so brief that most would have entirely missed it. Having spent a lifetime deciphering unspoken meanings and the tension that lurked beneath pleasantries, I recognized the subtle signals. That flicker in Astrid's eyes was a clear indication of secrets she harbored, perhaps even from her fiancé. I remained silent. It was my usual approach. Yet the image lingered in my mind. It wasn't jealousy that stirred within me, but genuine concern. Should Astrid be entangled in something beyond her control, it wouldn't just be her undoing. It could impact Cassian and, by extension, everyone connected to this marriage. For a brief moment, I considered issuing a warning, but then the memory of my mother's disapproving gaze and Astrid's condescending reminders to know my place resurfaced, and I held my tongue. There are instances where silence is a form of self-preservation, even if it carries the weight of a silent betrayal. The more I observed, the more I felt myself drifting into the role of an outsider within my own family. At dinner gatherings, my parents perpetually spoke as if Astrid's upcoming wedding represented the pinnacle of our family's achievements. My own accomplishments, however, were left unmentioned, dismissed as mere detached facts. One evening, my father raised his glass, declaring to Astrid and Cassian, "Proof that love and tradition are still alive in this family." The implication was searingly clear. Calla, with her career and single life, was the deviation, not the ideal. I forced a smile, lifted my own glass, and allowed the words to settle heavily within my gut. Each of these instances was a stone cast into water, generating ripples that steadily widened and deepened the chasm between us. They believed I was impervious, shielded by logic and my work. What they failed to grasp was that I felt everything. I simply chose not to reveal it. Nevertheless, silence has its boundaries, and though I was then unaware, the day would soon arrive when Astrid would no longer be content with mere words and fleeting glances. She would aim for something more public, an act specifically designed to humiliate me before a crowd of strangers. While this knowledge hadn't yet solidified in my mind, the seeds had been sown. Every comment, every dismissal, every veiled secret was propelling us toward that pivotal moment when the world would witness the true nature of our family. On the day of the rehearsal dinner, the seating chart was finally unveiled. Guests clustered around the large easel positioned at the hall's entrance, their eyes scanning the rows of names meticulously written in elegant script. I approached, searching for my own name with a fragile spark of hope, though by then I should have known better. Astrid's name was prominently displayed in the centre, beside Cassian's, encircled by our parents and Cassian's family. My gaze descended, line by line, until I eventually located my name, tucked away in the far corner at table 23, belonging to Callum Munro. This table was designated for mere acquaintances, my father's colleagues who barely knew me, and distant, out-of-town relatives who would likely forget my name by morning. It was a deliberate, openly declared exile, written in indelible ink for all to observe. I stood in quiet contemplation, staring at the chart, the edges of the letters slightly blurring as my chest tightened. I tried to convince myself it was merely a seat, a piece of furniture with a number attached. But deeply, I understood it was far more than that. It was a clear message. You are not central to this family. You are not meant to be seen. Later that evening, as cameras were being set up for the initial round of family photographs, the photographer consulted a list Astrid had meticulously prepared. Parents of the bride, bride and groom, grandparents, siblings. I instinctively stepped forward, smoothing my dress, but then I noticed the paper in his hand. My name was absent. He looked up at me, politely confused. "I don't see you listed, Ma'am." "Perhaps you're with the extended family shots." He intended no offence, but the words cut deeply nonetheless. Extended family. That's what I had become. Astrid then made her entrance, radiant and flushed with the attention, her laughter echoing across the room. She noticed me standing tentatively at the edge of the group and approached, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Oh, Calla!" she chirped brightly, her tone saccharine but her eyes sharp. "Don't look so surprised. Most of the guests don't even know who you are." "It's less awkward this way. You don't want people whispering, do you?" She tilted her head, feigning concern, then added in a hushed tone, audible only to me. "It's better this way. Your place is elsewhere, not here." I stared at her, words trembling on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed them down. For a moment, I recalled all the times I had been there for her when no one else was. The night she called me in college, panicking about overdue tuition, and I wired the money before she even had to ask. The day she needed a down payment for her first apartment, and I signed the check without hesitation. The period when our father's debts nearly engulfed the family, and I worked weekends to bridge the financial gap. Each memory ascended like smoke, clouding my vision, pressing against the silence that had become my defence. I had never once thrown those sacrifices in her face. I had given because she was my sister, because family was supposed to signify something profound. Yet here she was, erasing my very existence with a single sentence. "Guests don't know you. Better to be invisible. The photographer gently cleared his throat, sensing the discomfort. My parents were already positioned at the front, smiling as if nothing were amiss. My mother waved me off with a swift flick of her hand, the same gesture she used to brush crumbs from a table.
"We'll do a picture later," she said softly, though her eyes avoided mine. But there would be no later. I knew it, and so did Astrid. So I stepped back. I clasped my hands in front of me and allowed the camera flash without me. Astrid leaned into Cassian, brilliant as the bulbs popped, her veil catching the light. My parents stood proudly, their faces etched with joy, and I, for the 1,000th time, was the shadow just beyond the frame. As the laughter swelled around me, I forced myself to breathe steadily, reminding myself that self-worth was not measured by one's position in a photograph. Yet, within me, a quiet anger simmered. Not the kind that demanded yelling or confrontation, but the kind that remembered. The kind that meticulously etched each slight into stone. After the session concluded, Astrid passed me again, pausing briefly to murmur, "Don't take it personally, Calla. You were never really part of this picture anyway." She offered a sweet smile to nearby guests, who chuckled at some seemingly harmless joke she tossed into the air. But her words clung to me like a chilling frost. That night, alone in my hotel room, I examined the program left on the desk. My name was nowhere within its pages. Sponsors, family, bridal party, line after line. Yet I was conspicuously absent. It was as if my years of sacrifice, my silent support, my very presence had been expunged. I closed the booklet and carefully placed it beside the lamp. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge what I had long suspected. In Astrid's world, I was not a sister. I was an inconvenience. And tomorrow she intended to make that perfectly clear, regardless of who might be observing. The sting of exclusion sharpened something within me, a poignant reminder that even silence, for all its power, possessed its limitations. I would endure, but I would not forget. And when that moment arrived, as I instinctively knew it would, I would rise, even if they preferred me hidden in the deepest shadows. The reception hall glittered, chandeliers casting their light over tables draped in white linen and adorned with crystal glasses. An aura of refined elegance hung in the air, punctuated only by the soft hum of a string quartet and the polite murmur of 200 guests. I moved slowly along the aisle of tables, following the neat row of name cards until I located mine. The small card bore my name in the same elegant script as everyone else's, but the chair behind it felt like the only thing in the entire room that truly belonged to me. I reached for it, intending to claim my small space on a day that had already rendered me invisible. Just as I began to lower myself, the chair was sharply pulled back. In an instant, the floor seemed to vanish beneath me. My knees buckled, and I fell hard onto the polished surface. The resounding thud echoed through the vast hall like a crack of thunder, abruptly silencing all conversations. For one breathless moment, the world stood still. Then, a ripple of shocked gasps gave way to stifled laughter. I looked up, dazed, to see Astrid standing directly over me. Her fingers still clutched the chair, her smile poised and undeniably cruel. She leaned in close, so only I could hear, though the venom in her voice carried further than she perhaps intended. "The floor suits you better, sis." Those words struck harder than the marble beneath me. Around us, people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to offer comfort or avert their gaze. Some did both. My parents remained motionless at the head table, their expressions unreadable, their silence more deafening than any outright rebuke. No hand reached out to help me. No one stood. The humiliation was complete, meticulously orchestrated to be as public as possible, and she had succeeded. I could have wept. I could have lashed out, screamed, demanded respect. But I had spent too long accustomed to the drama of my sister's theatrics to grant her that satisfaction. So,
I pressed one palm to the cold marble, gathered my composure, and slowly rose. Every muscle ached, but I straightened my shoulders as if nothing untoward had happened. I calmly brushed off my dress with steady hands, the gesture as deliberate as it was defiant. The whispers circulating the room first swelled, then faltered, as the guests realized I would not be undone. Astrid tilted her head, anticipating a scene, perhaps a sharp retort she could twist into further drama. When none came, a flicker of frustration crossed her face. She had aimed to reduce me to tears, to strip me of my dignity, to forever brand me as the sister who belonged on the ground. Instead, I stood before her, unbroken, and in that protracted silence, she ultimately lost more than she gained. I turned, adjusted my dress once more, and walked purposefully toward the grand doors. Each deliberate step resonated with the firm click of my heels against the polished floor. The hushed murmurs of conversation resumed, but I consciously refrained from glancing back. I was acutely aware that my parents had chosen indifference, that Astrid had opted for malice, and that the attendees had prioritized their comfort over their conscience. This realization alone definitively established my position. Not within the family's embrace, nor even among the general gathering, but utterly alone. A profound shift occurred within me. For years I had tolerated minor slights, quiet negations, and subtle reminders that I failed to meet their expectations. I had borne their burdens, their desires, and their silences, operating under the assumption that family ties necessitated sacrifice. However, as I crossed the threshold of that grand hall, an undeniable boundary had been drawn. This was no mere inconvenience to be endured. This was the pivotal moment when my facade crumbled. The crisp corridor air enveloped me as I stepped outside, its bite more piercing than the chill of marble. I took a deep, steadying breath, my hands still trembling, not from frailty but from immense self-restraint. I was determined they would not witness my unravelling. Astrid had deliberately pushed me to the ground, and my parents had allowed my fall, yet I had risen. This undeniable truth surpassed the weight of their silence and even their laughter. As the doors swung shut behind me, muffling the festive sounds within, I recognized this as the breaking point. Years of patience, of swallowing my pride, of yearning for acknowledgement, concluded here. I had endured more than enough. Whatever lay ahead, I would no longer passively linger in the shadows, awaiting an invitation to their table. My inherent dignity would no longer be a fleeting privilege they could arbitrarily revoke. That evening, I departed the reception hall, not as the forgotten daughter or the overshadowed sister, but as a woman who had finally comprehended that silence was no longer a virtue, it was capitulation, and I was resolute in my refusal to yield again. I lingered in the corridor longer than intended, allowing the cool night air to temper the intensity radiating within me. The lingering echoes of laughter and hushed voices from the reception continued to press upon my ears. I yearned for a moment of tranquility before either rejoining the celebration or departing definitively. Yet, as fate would have it, my path intersected with an unforeseen revelation. Pushing open the restroom door, I was met by the dim light reflecting off the tiled floor. I paused upon hearing voices emanating from a far stall. It was Blair, my dearest friend, the unwavering companion through countless late nights, heartbreaks, and family disappointments. Her voice was unmistakably light and quick, a rhythm I had always found soothing. Now, however, it carried a sharpness that cut deeply. "She genuinely believes she's superior to everyone," Blair was asserting. "Always so refined, always so serious. It's frankly exhausting. Honestly, Astrid did us all a favour tonight. Calla belongs on the floor, not seated at the table. Who does she imagine herself to be, acting like some queen when she's just—" Her words dissolved into a bout of laughter, joined by another unfamiliar voice. I stood motionless, the door still ajar. my breath trapped in my throat. For an instant, I questioned if I had misheard, if it was someone else. But then Blair spoke again, more distinctly this time, leaving no room for doubt. I informed Astrid I'd assist in disseminating the story online. People adore a dramatic bride, and if I play it correctly, perhaps I'll finally achieve the following I deserve. I mean, Astrid promised she'd feature me in her upcoming campaign. That kind of exposure far outweighs any friendship. These words struck me with greater force than Astrid's cruelty ever had. From Astrid, I anticipated jealousy and malice, thinly disguised as charm. But Blair, she had been the one I called when the stillness of my apartment felt too oppressive, when I needed someone to remind me I was more than a mere bank account and a resume. She had insisted she admired my strength and valued my resilience, and now, shielded only by a thin wall, she had unveiled her true nature. I retreated silently, meticulously avoiding any sound, though my heart pounded so vehemently I feared it would betray my presence. I slipped out of the restroom and leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, fixating on the patterned carpet as if it could anchor me. The sting of this betrayal surpassed Astrid's pettiness. My sister's cruelty was almost predictable. Blair's disloyalty, however, cut far deeper because it was entirely unexpected and undeserved. Memories flashed before my mind's eye like a cruel montage. The evenings Blair and I spent consuming cheap wine, her assurances that genuine friends never needed to pretense. The time she held my hand through a challenging meeting with investors, affirming I was the strongest woman she knew. The afternoons spent in my apartment, laughing at Astrid's superficial social media posts and deriding the very world she now desperately sought to enter. All of it now felt tainted, revealed as a script she had discarded the instant a more alluring stage presented itself. I pressed a hand against my stomach, as if this physical pressure could quell the internal ache. But the pain was far more profound. It was the crushing realization that perhaps I truly had no one. Not my parents, not my sister, and now, not even my friend. I could have marched back in, confronted her, demanded an explanation. Yet, what purpose would it serve? The words were spoken, the truth revealed. Confrontation would only provide her with an opportunity for excuses, and I held no desire to hear them. Instead, I walked back toward the ballroom, my steps unwavering despite the hollowness in my chest. I discreetly found a seat in a distant corner, unnoticed, my previous spot already cleared by waiters who had evidently presumed my departure. I sat quietly, observing the chandelier's glow shimmer across the glassware. The delicate clinking of forks against plates, the sustained laughter, all carried on as if nothing untoward had transpired. The world continued its indifferent rotation, oblivious to my anguish. In that profound silence, I made a solemn vow to myself. I would not allow Astrid's cruelty to define me. I would not permit my parents' neglect to diminish me. And I would not let Blair's betrayal dictate my self-worth. Not one of them possessed the power to label me, to determine my intrinsic value. That right belonged solely to me. I straightened my posture, allowing my breath to steady. I had been pushed down, subjected to mockery and erased. I had been betrayed by both blood and friendship. Yet here I remained, still standing, still breathing, still unbroken. They could laugh, they could whisper, they could expunge me from programs and photographs, but they could never erase the truth of my essence. The night was far from over, and I sensed an even greater unfolding awaited. If Astrid believed she had triumphed by forcing me to the floor, she had fundamentally miscalculated. Her oversight lay in not realizing that the more they attempted to push me away, the stronger my resolve became. This was no longer about seeking their approval. This was about reclaiming my dignity in an environment that had presumed it could strip it from me. I briefly closed my eyes, letting the cacophony wash over me like ocean waves. The sting of Blair's words would not quickly dissipate, but it would not destroy me. I was more than their whispers, more than their betrayals, and one day soon, They would all witness the truth, whether they desired to or not. Upon my return to my corner seat, the clinking of glasses and the quartet's music permeated the air, as if no incident had occurred. The world around me persisted, oblivious to the bruised blossoming on my shoulder or the ache within my chest. I had envisioned disappearing there, unnoticed, simply awaiting the night's conclusion, but the truth was already escaping the hall's confines. Someone had been recording. A guest, phone in hand, had captured the precise moment Astrid yanked the chair, sending me forcefully to the floor. Within minutes, the video was uploaded to TikTok, accompanied by a gleeful, exaggerated caption. "Bride pulls savage stunt on sister! 200 guests gasped!" The footage spread like wildfire through dry grass, propelled by algorithms far more swiftly than any whispered gossip within the room. By the time dessert was served, a group of younger guests at a nearby table were already huddled over a phone, stifling laughter, then casting wide-eyed glances in my direction, clearly having just witnessed the footage. My stomach tightened. I feigned indifference, but a prickling unease spread beneath my skin. I quietly excused myself and stepped into the hallway, where the light was dimmer and the chatter muted. Pulling out my own phone, I hesitated, then opened the app. The clip had already amassed thousands of views in under an hour. My name wasn't tagged, but my face was undeniably recognizable. I watched it once, steels myself. The fall appeared more severe on screen than it had felt in the moment. The collective gasp of the guests, the ensuing silence, Astrid's triumphant smirk as she bent toward me. It was all captured, immortalized. And then there I was, rising slowly, brushing off my dress, my back erect, my face composed. No tears, no shouting, just dignity in the face of sheer humiliation. The comments streamed faster than I could possibly read them. "That bride is cruel. Who does that to her own sister?" "This woman fell but stood up like a queen. The floor didn't deserve her." "Imagine marrying someone while treating your family like dirt." A few jokes were interspersed, light-hearted cruelties concerning weddings and family drama, but the majority expressed indignation, outraged on my behalf. My initial instinct was panic. The thought of millions of strangers watching me stumble across a marble floor filled me with a desire to vanish. My reputation was meticulously built on precision and control. I had dedicated years to ensuring my name signified competence and strength in boardrooms filled with skeptical men. Now, here I was, transformed into a spectacle, a meme, a hashtag. I considered contacting the guest who posted it, demanding its removal. But the more I scrolled, the more my perspective began to shift. The comments weren't mocking me. They were condemning her. They perceived the cruelty for what it truly was. They observed the composure I had forced myself to maintain, and they admired it. For once, I didn't need to explain, to defend, to prove anything. The truth was plainly visible without my utterance. The video itself served as my undeniable witness. It was stark, unequivocal, stripped bare of all the narratives my family had consistently woven to portray me as cold, difficult, or undeserving. Here, strangers witnessed my resilience, not my collapse. As I stood in the hallway, the phone's glow illuminating my hands, an unforeseen realization dawned on me. I no longer dreaded the exposure. Let them observe, let them disseminate it, let them comment, let them scrutinize it in 1,000 ways. Because with every replay, Astrid unveiled her true self, and I, too, unveiled mine. She exhibited her cruelty. I demonstrated my strength. When I returned my phone to my purse, my heart felt steadier. The gnawing fear in my stomach began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet determination. If my family insisted on silencing me, if my sister desired my humiliation, then this serendipitous recording, was my opportunity to let the world perceive me without filters, without explanations. I re-entered the ballroom, the music swelling, laughter bubbling as if absolutely nothing had changed. Yet, something profound had. The online whispers resonated louder than those within the room, and I sensed this was merely the genesis. The stage Astrid had so confidently claimed for herself was now slipping from her grasp, and the spotlight was beginning, however faintly, to illuminate me. Cassian had spent the majority of the evening caught between the obligations of a groom and the burgeoning unease that permeated the periphery of the celebration. Astrid had dismissed the incident with her sister as a harmless jest, encouraging guests to resume their meals, sweeping aside the lingering murmurs. Nevertheless, when Cassian's gaze drifted toward Calla, seated in deliberate silence at the far side of the hall, an unsettling feeling stirred within him. It wasn't pity, precisely. It was a recognition of dignity in the face of abasement, a composure he had observed in vastly different contexts, typically across negotiating tables where fortitude surpassed charm. As he raised a glass to acknowledge a cluster of guests, his eyes fixated on the chain adorning Calla's neck. A diminutive gold pendant, shaped like a phoenix, shimmered under the lights. The firebird's wings curved upward, indistinguishable from a logo he had scrutinized countless times across legal contracts and wire transfers. C. Monroe Holdings. His pulse quickened. That symbol was far from common. It wasn't a design one would casually acquire in a boutique. It represented the emblem of the fund that had rescued his company from financial ruin. It was the very brand of the enigmatic benefactor who had injected not one, but 3 rounds of capital when every other investor had recoiled. He attempted to dismiss the thought. Perhaps it was mere coincidence, a gift or a trinket. Yet the name itself resonated with him. Monroe, Astrid's surname, and Calla's too. He excused himself from the table, withdrawing to the room's edge where his phone was charging. With tense fingers, he accessed the secure portal used for managing investor relations. He retrieved the ledger of emergency financing from 2 years prior, 3 tranches totaling $20 million. Each entry was listed under C, Monroe Holdings. The corporate shell had no accompanying photos, no personal biography, only a symbol in the header, a firebird ascending from ashes. His eyes darted back to Calla across the hall. She adjusted her dress, the pendant catching the chandelier light once more. His chest tightened. Could it genuinely be her? He scrolled further through the documents, opening the section that enumerated managing partners. The name appeared distinctly, though he had previously skimmed over it without pause. Calla E. Monroe. It had been there all along. His throat went dry. He looked again toward Astrid, resplendent at the head table, basking in the glow of attention, and the truth slammed into him with brutal clarity. Calla, the sister who had been pushed to the floor, was the one who had uplifted him when his own empire had teetered on the brink of collapse. She was the silent force behind his survival, the investor whose unwavering faith had enabled him to retain his employees, his reputation, his future. And Astrid had never uttered a single word. She had met his gaze, played the part of the devoted fiancée, and allowed him to believe she was the connected one, the one embodying stability. He had assumed her self-assurance stemmed from some unseen resource. Now, he understood it had emanated from her sister's shadow, a borrowed light she had never acknowledged. Cassian's stomach churned. He recalled the desperate nights spent awake in his office, staring at the dwindling cash flow, wondering if he would be forced to liquidate everything he had meticulously built. The relief that inundated him when the initial transfer appeared, the profound gratitude he had vowed to repay one day when he discovered the identity of the person who had extended such unwavering belief. That vow had shaped him, keeping him resolute as he rebuilt. And now, amidst champagne and laughter, he realized his debt lay not with his bride, but with the woman her family treated as invisible. He glanced once more at Calla. She sat with her back straight, her face serene, as though the cruelty she had endured had left no trace. She was unaware of his scrutiny, oblivious that recognition had finally reached him. His gaze flicked back to Astrid, and for the first time, he perceived not charm, not beauty, but manipulation. The way she had skillfully steered conversations, always framing her family in terms that marginalized her sister. The way she consistently evaded details whenever the subject of finances arose. She had concealed the truth not only from him, but from everyone, because the truth jeopardized her carefully constructed role as the star. Cassian's hands clenched around the phone. He felt the sting of betrayal deepen. It wasn't merely that Astrid had failed to inform him. It was that she had deliberately chosen deceit, actively erasing her sister's contribution to preserve her own illusion. That decision cut deeper than any petty cruelty he had witnessed in the hall. It implied her willingness to construct her marriage, their future, on a foundation of lies. The weight of it pressed upon him as he closed the screen. Around him, the laughter of the guests echoed hollowly. For the first time all night, he felt no pride in the celebration, no joy in the toasts or the music. All he experienced was the gravity of the truth, the shifting of loyalty in his own heart, and the growing certainty that this night, intended as the genesis of everything, had instead revealed a fault line that could not be disregarded. Across the room, Calla reached for a glass of water, the pendant at her neck flashing once more. The phoenix, a potent symbol of rebirth, of survival against all adversity. Cassian found himself unable to avert his gaze. He realized he owed her not only his gratitude but his honesty, and that profound realization would irrevocably alter everything. Cassian remained at the head table, the laughter of guests washing over him like distant waves, but his focus had now narrowed, centered on the truth burning fiercely within his chest. He could no longer sit idly by, not when the woman who had once salvaged everything he had painstakingly built was being treated as if she were utterly insignificant. His eyes swept across the room, catching sight of Calla in the far corner, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. The pendant at her throat gleamed beneath the chandeliers, a silent testament demanding acknowledgement. His grip tightened on the microphone in front of him. He rose to his feet. The chatter in the hall automatically softened. Guests anticipating another polished toast, another anecdote designed to flatter the bride and entertain the crowd. Cassian allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to capture everyone's attention. Then he turned, his gaze fixed not on Astrid but on Calla. His voice carried across the room, firm and clear. "Miss Monroe," he uttered the words deliberately, each syllable cutting through the room's hum. "You're the one who saved my $20 million company, aren't you?" For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to cease breathing. The quartet faltered mid-note. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Every head turned in unison toward the corner table where Calla sat. The camera from the livestream crew, discreetly positioned until now, swung sharply to capture her face, broadcasting her stunned composure to every screen where friends and strangers watched from afar. Astrid's smile stiffened, her hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth as if she could maintain the room's order through sheer force of will. Her parents shifted in their seats, confusion gradually morphing into alarm. The silence deepened, stretching taut, until its oppressive weight pressed upon every chest in the room. Calla did not immediately rise. She looked at Cassian, her eyes steady, though her pulse hammered in her throat. She had not sought this spotlight, had not desired recognition here of all places. But now the truth had been articulated, undeniable. Slowly, she placed her hands on the table, stood, and allowed the gaze of 200 guests to fully rest upon her. She neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining her silence with the same unwavering composure she had exhibited when she rose from the floor earlier that evening. From the back of the hall, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound was hesitant, uncertain, but it broke the spell of stillness. Another joined, then another. A ripple of applause moved through the room, not jubilant but reverent, as if the guests realized they had been complicit in something shameful, and were only now recalling what true dignity looked like. Among the murmurs came a whisper that carried farther than it should have, spoken by a woman at the next table. So, she's the one. She's the truly brilliant Monroe. The words spread in a hush, repeated and rephrased until the air itself seemed to buzz with their resonance. Astrid's cheeks flushed crimson. She attempted to laugh, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, but her voice faltered, drowned by the weight of recognition shifting irrevocably away from her and onto her sister. Their mother leaned toward her, whispering frantically, but even she could not mask the unease in her eyes. For years they had dismissed Calla, diminished her contributions as though success outside of marriage meant absolutely nothing. Now, in a single declaration, that narrative had unravelled before their entire world. Cassian slowly lowered the microphone, yet his gaze remained fixed on Kayla. Deep gratitude radiated from his expression, tinged with regret for not having acknowledged her sooner. He had devoted months to preparing for this wedding, assuring himself he was building his life on sincerity. And yet, the truth had been apparent all along, disregarded because it was inconvenient for those who desired the spotlight to be elsewhere. Kayla inclined her head slightly, a gesture not of arrogance but of calm acknowledgement. She felt no need to claim accolades, not in this setting. The truth was already palpable in the room, undeniable, carried on the voices of those who, just hours earlier, had mocked her misfortune. And in their subsequent silence, now replaced by applause, she sensed an internal transformation. This humiliation had been intended to obliterate her. Instead, it had unveiled her true self. The chandeliers gleamed overhead, yet it was Carla who commanded the room's attention. And despite standing alone, she no longer felt overlooked. The room still resonated with the profound silence that followed Cassian's initial declaration, when he once again raised the microphone. His voice was steady, but it now carried an unmistakable sharpness, a tone that pierces through pleasantries and exposes what others might prefer to keep concealed. "There's something else," he stated, his eyes now fixed not on Calla but on Astrid. The bride shifted uneasily in her seat, her forced smile faltering, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Guests leaned forward, discerning that the evening had ceased to be about pleasantries or celebration, and had instead become about candour. Cassian took a breath, then delivered his words with deliberate gravity. "Astrid once sent confidential files from my company to a competitor. It was Carla who quietly managed the fallout without ever seeking recognition." A murmur spread like a seismic wave across the hall. Some gasped audibly, others whispered intensely to their companions. Astrid's face paled, then flushed a vivid red. She swiftly shook her head, forcing a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "That's preposterous," she declared, her voice noticeably higher. "Why would I ever?" But Cassian interrupted her, his tone now even sharper. "Because you wanted my downfall. You craved control. And you believed if Carla couldn't rescue the situation, you would prove she was incapable of assisting anyone. Isn't that the truth?" His words lingered in the air like a final judgment. Astrid opened her mouth, then closed it, no denial able to withstand the force of his conviction. Carla stood silently, her expression composed, though inwardly her chest ached with comprehension. She had known fragments of this truth, had observed the indications, but had never articulated them. The late-night calls from Cassian's legal team, the frantic efforts to contain the breach, the silent choice she made afterward to protect her family's reputation. It all returned with stark clarity. She had never exposed Astrid's involvement, believing mercy was the more humane approach. And now, under the brilliant chandeliers and live stream cameras, that mercy had concluded. The weight of the revelation settled most heavily on Astrid's shoulders. She rose halfway from her chair, trembling with the effort to maintain her composure. but the gazes of 200 guests held her captive. Her father shifted uncomfortably. Her mother whispered her name as if to coax her back into her seat, but no shield was potent enough to mitigate the impact of what had just been spoken. Then a new voice, firm and resolute, resonated from near the front of the room. It was Cassian's mother. She stood tall, her posture commanding, her voice carrying the authority of a woman long accustomed to earning respect. "Enough," she stated, her eyes fixed on Astrid. "Our family will not align itself with treachery. We do not welcome deception into our home. My son will not marry someone like you." The words struck with the force of a definitive verdict. No one dared to interrupt. Astrid's hands trembled as she clutched the folds of her gown. Her lips moved, searching for words, but no sound emerged. The applause that had initially begun for Carla had dissipated into a silence colder than marble, broken only by the faint clicks of cameras documenting her humiliation. Throughout it all, Carla did not smile. She did not gloat, nor did she savor the moment of reversal. Her heart felt heavy, not triumphant. She saw not a vanquished rival, but a sister unraveling under the burden of her own envy. Astrid's choices had prepared this downfall long before the wedding day. Tonight merely brought to light what had been concealed in the shadows. Kayla found no joy in this, only sorrow that jealousy had consumed a woman who might have chosen affection, who might have chosen family. The atmosphere in the hall grew dense with shame. Guests shifted uneasily, unwilling to meet Astrid's eyes. Some murmured, others shook their heads, but no one moved to defend her. Now in the corner, Kayla's reflection in the glass window gazed back at her, a reminder that she had carried dignity quietly, while others pursued spectacle. Cassian slowly lowered the microphone, his expression now etched in stone. The wedding, once meticulously planned, now lay in ruins around them. But for the first time, the truth had been fully revealed. And in that truth, Kayla stood taller than ever before, not because she had triumphed over her sister, but because she had refused to let betrayal define her. Inwardly, she whispered the words she could not utter aloud. She pitied Astrid, and pity, not hatred, was the only gift she could still offer her sister. The silence that followed Cassian's mother's condemnation of Astrid still lingered in the room like an invisible shroud. No one dared to move. Astrid remained frozen, her forced smile utterly gone, while Carla stayed standing, her hands loosely clasped before her, steady, even though her heart trembled within. The guests shifted restlessly in their seats, the raw spectacle of betrayal and revelation still reverberating in the air. Then, Cassian's mother began to move forward. Her steps were neither rushed nor hesitant, but deliberate, imbued with a gravity that caused people to subtly draw back as she passed. She halted before Carla and looked at her with eyes that had softened, though they still held an inherent authority. "I know you," she stated, her voice clear, not with accusation, but with quiet certainty. The words startled Carla more than anything else that had been spoken that night. She had not anticipated recognition here, least of all from this woman. The older woman's gaze did not falter. "Not you directly," she continued, "but your mother. Years ago, when I had nothing, when my husband's business was teetering, and we didn't know how we would manage, your mother stepped in. She didn't ask for repayment. She didn't even let me thank her properly. She simply helped as if it was the most natural thing to do." Carla felt her breath catch in her throat. Memories surged unbidden. Her mother at the kitchen table late at night, writing checks she could barely afford, preparing meals for neighbours in need, bearing burdens quietly without boasting or complaint. Her mother had always taught that strength lay not in what one demanded, but in what one gave freely. To hear this now, before hundreds of eyes, was like feeling her mother's presence enter the room, unseen but undeniably real. Cassian's mother's voice softened further, yet it carried far enough for every guest to hear clearly. "And tonight, I see her in you. The same dignity, the same quiet strength. While others tried to humiliate you, you stood taller than them without ever raising your voice. That is your mother's spirit living through you. Do not forget it. Carla's composure fractured. The tears she had held back all evening welled up and spilled before she could stop them, warm trails cutting down her cheeks. These were not tears of shame this time, nor of helplessness, but of profound release. For the first time in years, someone older, someone with authority spoke to her not with disdain or dismissal, but with genuine recognition. They saw her not as the unmarried daughter, not as the sister to be sidelined, but as her mother's true heir, carrying a legacy of integrity. Her lips trembled as she tried to respond, but no words came. She lightly pressed a hand to her face, almost embarrassed by the raw emotion displayed before so many. Yet, the silence that now filled the room was different from before. It was not burdened with cruelty or judgment. It was reverent. Even the guests who had laughed earlier seemed humbled, reminded of something far greater than mere spectacle. Astrid turned away, her own eyes hard, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. But Carla no longer focused on her. In that moment, her world had narrowed to the woman in front of her, to the echoing kindness of her mother resurfacing in this unexpected place. Cassian's mother reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from Carla's face in a gesture both intimate and maternal. "You do not need this family's recognition," she said quietly, though the microphone still caught her words distinctly. "You already carry something far greater, and anyone with sense can see it." The tears flowed freely then, but Carla made no attempt to stop them. She let them fall, her shoulders shaking once, then steadily firming. For so long she had carried herself like steel, convinced that only unyielding control could shield her from the scorn of those closest to her. Tonight, that armor finally cracked, and instead of revealing weakness, it revealed a different kind of strength. The strength to accept that she was worthy of love and respect, simply for being who she was, and for continuing the quiet greatness of the woman who had nurtured her. The applause that rose this time was softer than before, less about spectacle and more about solidarity. It was the sound of people reminded of their shared humanity, of family bonds that could endure cruelty when nurtured by grace. Carla lifted her chin slightly, meeting Cassian's mother's eyes, and whispered through her tears, "Thank you." The older woman nodded once, as if sealing a profound bond, then returned to her seat, leaving Carla standing taller than ever before. She caressed her face with the back of her hand, no longer concealing her tears. For the first time that evening, a lightness settled within her, not the lightness of triumph or vindication, but a profound peace she hadn't known in ages. She understood that her mother's essence endured, manifest in her own actions, and now, at last, another voice had affirmed it. This validation surpassed any acclaim Astrid had ever sought. The reception hall remained taut with the reverberation of Cassian's mother's words as Calla advanced towards the head table. Her steps were deliberate, unhurried, her heels tapping against the polished floor with a steady rhythm that echoed far beyond their immediate sound. Guests tracked her movement with their eyes, scarcely daring to breathe, as if any stir might shatter the delicate equilibrium of the unfolding drama. She reached the table where Astrid still sat, trembling in her seat, her face pallid and strained, the last vestiges of pride barely sustaining the facade she had maintained all night. Calla paused for a moment in silence, her hand grazing the chain around her neck where her mother's pendant lay, drawing fortitude from its presence. Then, she slowly slipped her fingers into her clutch and withdrew the item she had instinctively carried, the Monroe family ring. It was neither grand nor ostentatious, but it had descended through generations via the maternal line, a symbol of heritage. Astrid had always presumed it would one day be hers, given her favoured status, but ultimately it was Calla who had been entrusted with it. With the same poise she had displayed throughout the evening's many humiliations, Calla placed the ring upon the white linen tablecloth, The small gold circle caught the chandelier's glow, gleaming starkly against the pristine surface. Her voice, though soft, possessed a clarity that pierced the silence. "I hope one day you understand," she stated, her gaze fixed on Astrid. "That honour is not borrowed. It cannot be seized by force or secured through marriage. It is something you embody through your deeds. And tonight, you revealed to the world that you never possessed it." A ripple of murmurs spread among the guests, not malicious or derisive, but solemn. Astrid's lips parted as if to articulate a reply, but no sound emerged. She stared at the ring, her hand twitching once before freezing in her lap, unable to reach for it. Calla straightened, allowing the finality of her gesture to permeate the atmosphere. Cassian then stepped forward, his face etched with emotion, but his voice softer than it had been all evening. "I once believed I wanted to marry Astrid," he confessed, his eyes searching Calla's. "But tonight, I realize that admiration and respect form the bedrock of anything worthwhile, and those belong to you." His words were not romantic, nor even an invitation, but a raw admission of truth laid bare before everyone present. Calla met his gaze only briefly before her eyes returned to her family. Her father's expression was inscrutable, his pride wounded in front of his peers. Her mother's lips were pressed tightly, her eyes shimmering, not with tears, but with the profound realization that the daughter she had dismissed for years now stood taller than any of them. The silence stretched, oppressive. But Calla did not falter. She desired no apologies, no belated confessions of remorse. She had invested too much of herself to earn what they had never been willing to acknowledge. With a final, steady, and unwavering look at them, she turned abruptly. The movement was elegant, resolute, her dress swaying gently as she proceeded towards the doors. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, others watching in quiet awe. A few instinctively rose, as if recognizing that the true dignity in the room was departing, not in defeat, but in triumph. Astrid remained paralyzed, gazing at the untouched ring on the table, the weight of her sister's words pressing heavier than any rebuke. Calla's parents made no move to stop her, and in that stillness, their silence became a palpable admission of culpability. As Calla reached the grand doors of the hall, the chandeliers glittered behind her, their light bathing her in a benediction. She did not look back. The echoes of her footsteps followed her into the corridor, leaving behind a hall filled with people who would recount that moment long after the flowers had wilted and the champagne had lost its sparkle. For the first time in years, Calla felt no compulsion to defend herself, no craving for vindication. She had not arrived to establish anything, and yet, by the end, the truth had resounded more powerfully than every falsehood. She carried nothing but her dignity, and that, she knew, was more than ample. The city pulsed with its own rhythm when Calla stepped onto the balcony later that night. The distant drone of traffic, the flicker of neon signs against glass towers, the muffled thump of music from bars and late-night cafes, all of it rose to greet her, as if to remind her that life carried on, indifferent to the wreckage left in a single wedding hall. The cool air brushed against her skin, sharp but purifying, washing away the last traces of perfume and champagne clinging to her dress. She leaned on the railing, letting the night envelop her. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand, the screen illuminating with a new email, its subject line stark and professional. She opened it, her eyes scanning rapidly, then slowing to absorb the words. "We'd like to offer you the role of Global Financial Strategist." A position she had only dared to imagine, an opportunity that would place her at the helm of decisions rippling far beyond the narrow confines of family drama. She exhaled, the weight of it settling in, not as pressure, but as boundless possibility. For years, she had been the unseen hand behind figures that salvaged corporations, the silent force who never sought praise. Now, recognition was arriving unbidden, earned by the consistency of her choices, by the unwavering integrity no one in her family had seen fit to acknowledge. Another vibration interrupted her thoughts. This time, it was a message. She hesitated before opening it, as if mentally bracing herself. Cassian's name glowed on the screen. The words were brief, simple, yet deeply layered. I still owe you that dinner. No tux, no bride, just you and me. She stared at the text for a sustained moment. Its sincerity was unmistakable. This was not a ploy, not a desperate attempt to fill the void Astrid had left. It was gratitude, and perhaps something deeper, an acknowledgement that what he had admired in her tonight was not an accident, but the very essence of who she was. Calla's thumb hovered over the screen, her mind cycling through a myriad of possible replies. She could type yes, she could type no, she could leave the door ajar with a single neutral line, but instead she locked the phone and set it aside. Some decisions merited patience, and this one was not about him. Not yet. She moved closer to the railing, her hands circling the cool metal as she surveyed the expanse of lights. The skyline stretched before her, sharp and brilliant, a testament to ambition and resilience. She let her eyes trace the grid of streets, the radiant windows of apartments filled with strangers, each living their own tales of sorrow and perseverance. For the first time in years, she felt untethered, not adrift, but truly free. Her thoughts turned inward, quiet and resolute. All her life she had measured herself against the burden of family expectations, against the silence of withheld recognition, against the sting of being cast aside. Tonight had shattered those illusions, not because the world had suddenly chosen to perceive her, but because she had chosen to stand firm in her own worth, irrespective of who noticed or who turned away. The email awaited, the message lingered, yet her heart was not in a rush to claim either. She whispered to herself, almost as if her mother might hear it carried on the wind. Before I choose who walks with me, I'll choose myself. The words settled like a vow, not dramatic, not heavy, but profoundly grounding. She would not gauge her future by the approval of parents who had never truly understood her, nor by the affections of a man only just realizing what he had overlooked. She would measure it by the life she forged with her own hands, by the dignity she refused to surrender. The city lights glimmered, reflecting in her eyes as she offered a faint smile. A smile that held no bitterness, only unwavering resolve. She squared her shoulders, inhaled deeply, and allowed the nocturnal symphony of the streets below to wash over her. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Tonight she had peace, and so she stood on the balcony, not as the woman humiliated at her sister's wedding, not as the clandestine benefactor of a corporation, not as the daughter her parents dismissed. She stood as Calla Monroe, her own choice, her own strength, her own future. Whatever came next would not define her. She would define herself. And that is where Calla's story leaves us for now, standing on a balcony with the city lights stretching endlessly before her, choosing herself above all else. Her journey reminds us that dignity isn't bestowed or taken away. It is claimed by the way you stand, even when the world attempts to pull the rug out from under you. If you have ever experienced moments of being underestimated, marginalized, or made to feel small, then you understand the profound power of reclaiming your own worth. I would love to hear your reflections on this narrative. What course of action would you have taken in Calla's shoes? Do you believe she should respond to Cassian's message, or should she continue on her path alone? Please share your perspective in the comments below. I read every single one, and your insights deepen the meaning of these stories. If this narrative has captured your imagination and you're eager for further tales brimming with drama, unwavering resilience, and astonishing turns of events, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, ensuring you're always aligned with our next enthralling installment. Your steadfast support is instrumental in enabling the creation of additional narratives like this one, and I eagerly anticipate our continued collaboration on future endeavors.